Hi, guys. I am so happy to be able to be here today and introduce the speaker. I met him about 9 years ago in the classroom. As a very bright, talented young artist, and it's a great pleasure to be able to welcome him back as a guest speaker today. Since graduating from MCAD in 2010, just in case any of you guys were wondering what Peter Wortman 10 meant, but it confused me for a moment. So he graduated in 2010 and has been working very hard as a designer in town and doing comics in every spare moment when he's not at work. He's actually gained literary recognition for his own comic series, Over the Wall and Stonebreaker, from both the Onion and the Young Adult Library Services Association. Please welcome Peter Wartman.
Thanks, Barb. Yeah, it's a little strange to be on this side of the auditorium now. Like, I can remember when I was a student here, kind of thinking about, like one day when I'm successful, I'll get to come back and I get to talk from this side. So it's really exciting to be up here and be successful, whatever that means. Yeah, so I'm just going to go over like what my career has been like and kind of the weird path it's taken. And I hope it'll be interesting. And yeah, so first I'm just going to start off, I guess, looking back at kind of what I was doing when I was here at MCAD. So this is actually part of my senior project. I came to MCAD thinking I was going to be doing actually like game art. Like, I was really interested in like doing like concept art and like drawing spaceships and guys in like space armor and stuff. Which obviously this is not quite that. So there's a bit of a change, because I think I learned or kind of realized over time that what I was really interested in was sort of storytelling. Kind of like that world building and kind of that putting together that part of games, like not so much like the gameplay or sort of any of that stuff. So, and I was also like starting to get into like watching some animation and TV shows, like this really cool one called Avatar that I thought was awesome, and sort of like just getting more interested in telling stories. And for my final project, I think kind of because I was about to like head off into the real world and was a little afraid of things. It was just about this possum guy named Philip who was afraid of the dark, he was off on a camping trip and kind of afraid of everything, and sort of about him sort of confronting the unknown and kind of learning to deal with it and seeing the positive parts of it. Which I feel, that's kind of where my brain was at. And that's going to kind of keep coming back when you see like the stuff I'm drawing. Like, it's always sort of where I'm at the time. And yeah, it's just another page from that comic. You can kind of see like already like some of the themes that I keep coming back to are there, like this sort of like isolated character. He's kind of lonely. Like, the environment is almost a character in and of itself, and it's sort of not just showing a place, but showing kind of the emotional state of the character. And that's something I'm really interested in doing. I'm also interested in like having characters running away from giant monsters. And like even back here, I was starting to kind of get into that. So yeah, I was afraid of the unknown, and then I kind of jumped into it after college, and I started doing this, which isn't illustration or comics or anything like that. I ended up at a graphic design firm called CSA Design. It's in downtown Minneapolis. And I actually got that job at the MCAD job fair, of all places. So, you never know. MCAD's given me a lot, apparently. And I knew a little bit about web design, so they just kind of started throwing web stuff at me, and I kind of learned it on the job. And I think that's, like, one thing I kind of learned was that it is hard to make money at comics. Like, that's just how it is. But I had a lot of skills from that that I could kind of use in other places. And so for the next 7 years, actually, I was working at this place, working in web design, and also doing stuff like this, sort of like drawing. They also like have a stock image thing, so we were doing like lots of weird kind of mascot images, and I was doing some design work like that kind of Otter logo. So I was still able to use kind of my illustration degree, because I wasn't a comic major. I was able to use my illustration degree in some ways to kind of make things work, and I had a day job, so I had some money, and I could spend the rest of my time kind of focusing on like still telling stories. So it's something I really wanted to do, is to make a comic. And this is my first attempt at a webcomic. It's actually something that didn't really go anywhere. It was this thing called Shipwrecked Planet, about this planet upon which ships wrecked. And it was like this giant, kind of expansive, epic story that didn't really have an end or really any defined characters. And I don't know, it kind of crashed and burned at some point. I think partially because, I just didn't really feel anything for the characters yet, and I think I was trying to make something that would be popular rather than something that spoke to me. So, I went back after this and started just thinking about, like what would I try to come up with a different idea that would actually have some legs. And so these are kind of like some initial sketches from what eventually became Over the Wall, which also took a couple attempts before I got to it. I think there's actually like 3 attempts I started drawing it and then gave up. So that's, I think, the second attempt on the, what is that, left there? And then sort of really early version of the demon guy, who's one of the main characters. I think it's just I started realizing just how much iteration plays a role. But in drawing these characters, they spoke to me. They were kind of interesting. They were kind of fun. And eventually I got to doing Over the Wall, this is where it all ended up. It's just about this young girl who kind of ventures into this mostly abandoned city, trying to find her lost brother. And instead of like what I was doing with Shipwrecked Planet, which was this giant, expansive, kind of impossible to pin down what the story is really about, this is a very simple kind of mythic story, right? It's pretty familiar. She's just trying to find her brother. It's pretty easy to understand. And I had an end date in place, which is good for actually getting to that point. And another important thing was that I had these 2 characters who I really kind of appreciated. You have Anya and Taurus, who's the weird monster guy. Who they didn't actually have names yet in the story because the story's weird like that. But they both had like personalities that were like fun to kind of play off each other. Like Anya's very kind of outgoing and kind of gets herself into trouble all the time. Taurus is more kind of like held back. And I think a large part of what allowed me to actually finish this comic was that I had so much fun like writing these characters and just kind of putting them in places that they had to get out of. This is probably like comes a lot from like I was reading a lot of young adult novels growing up, and there's always kind of the plucky young protagonist who just kind of works her way into like bigger situations than she's ready for. So there's like a lot in this story about like transitions and about kind of ending up in situations that or like where like 2 cultures kind of meet or 2 points of view. I think again, like this is kind of where I was at the time. I was kind of like moving into a different place that was sort of scary. This big empty city, right? Like there's metaphors here that are pretty obvious. And I think like a theme that I keep coming back to is sort of these colliding perspectives and kind of thinking about how different characters perceive the same events. A lot about memory and stuff too. Again, like I'm still kind of focusing on environment as character. If you guys know what the game Shadow of the Colossus is, you'll probably be able to see where a lot of my ideas come from. Not just in terms of like, drawing giant monsters and drawing these kind of cityscapes, but I really like the way like those games and like some other stories too kind of have like this sense of mystery and sense of kind of like this empty location, and that kind of like it's really important to me to like make sure that the environment is kind of reinforcing that feeling and creating a space and kind of playing like an important role in the story. And I guess with Over the Wall, I was also kind of learning how to draw comics again. Like really kind of getting into the way that works. Like if you remember, like the last panel we had, like the big monster like stepping over the bridge. and that had one kind of impact. And I was trying to think about, thinking about with the weirdness of time in comics, and like kind of when do you step back and kind of spend a lot of time on having, just this monster step over the bridge, so there's some like tension and a little bit of fear, and also trying to figure out how to draw action. I don't know. I guess I just kind of like that page, so I put it up there. And eventually, I didn't really have any plan of getting Over the Wall into print. Like, that didn't really occur to me. I just wanted to make a comic, and I knew I could put it online because webcomics were sort of becoming a bigger thing in 2011 or whenever it was I was doing this. But again, MCAD kind of came back because one of my teachers, Tom Kaczynski, ended up starting a publishing company around the same time, and he asked, hey, would you like to get Over the Wall printed? And I said, yeah. And that was an exciting moment to actually have like a real published book with a real publisher. I guess I kind of thought that would be it, right? Like that's kind of the moment where I could like quit my job and be a real like illustrator, real comic book person. No, that's not really what happened. I never really made too much money on Over the Wall, like certainly not enough to live on, maybe pay the rent like for a couple months if I thought about it that way. But I kept the day job, kept working there. But what it did give me was kind of the ability to start going to shows, not only with Tom, but eventually on my own, and having something to show, having something to say, like here's like something I've made that's, it's a full, complete book, it's a real thing, I can do this, and that would eventually lead to other places. It would just take a while. So this is just kind of the start of like another step in the road, and about midway through, I guess. And I was still working at CSA, but I still wanted to draw comics. So I started thinking about what the next thing would be. Here's just some more concept art of Anya and Taurus as they start changing. I really hate the idea of like clean endings in stories. I'm always kind of interested about what happens afterwards. I really don't like happily ever after. So I was wondering, like, where would these characters be in like 4 years? Like, what are the consequences of Anya's actions in the first book? So that's basically where, and I think part of it again is like I was just really kind of invested in these characters now. I kind of wanted to keep talking about them and exploring their story. And for some reason, Taurus got feathers at some point. I don't know why, but it was fun. And so I started drawing Stonebreaker, which is the sequel to Over the Wall. And it's different in a lot of ways. One is that it is quite a bit longer, and I'll get back to that in a second. But also, the characters kind of have changed a bit. Like Anya's a lot more comfortable in the city, so I was trying to draw, a lot of pages that kind of showed that, showing her sort of exploring on her own now. She doesn't need to be guided. And Taurus is sort of more of an introverted character. And again, this kind of gives me a chance to play these characters off each other. It's, it's fun to have like one character who's always trying to get into problems, and another character who's always trying a little too much to get away from them, and playing with like how that bounces off each other. And sometimes when they like switch roles and stuff, like just having characters who are different but still trying to be friends is a really fun way to keep it interesting. And I'm still doing transitions, although I kind of flipped the story where like now Anya is leaving the city instead of going into it, which maybe says something about where her mind's at. And there's still more about not just the danger of these weird demon creatures in the city, but also kind of the things her culture has done to kind of reinterpret their past, and how memory is kind of like what you forget and what you kind of choose to forget. Like, I don't know, the themes got quite a bit more complicated than just finding your brother in the first book. And that, yeah, so Stonebreaker's a much more like ambitious project, one of which I'm still kind of struggling with the implications of something so huge, but it has a lot of themes is what I'm trying to say, and it's hard to like boil it all down into a slideshow. And again, like I'm just coming back to like looking at the environment and thinking about, how time works in comics. So like often in Stonebreaker, like the environment is this overwhelming kind of oppressive thing, where, Anya is very small in this big place. And when I break out a big scene like this, I'm also thinking about like how much time is the reader going to take on that image. So like in that like first panel, like it's all about setting up the feel of the scene, and you kind of want someone to spend time on there. Not much is happening. It's very quiet and kind of a little creepy, hopefully. And like choosing like when to add the detail, when to kind of to make something that people are going to spend time looking at, and how that is going to impact the story, as opposed to in a scene like this where it's all about the expressions and about like the motion of this bird, the background doesn't matter, and it's actually kind of a distracting thing. So I'll often just drop the background out, and also it makes it a lot faster to draw some pages, which is good. So like I'm still kind of learning like the best ways of, as I'm drawing, the best ways of kind of telling a story and playing with like when is it important to have a lot of detail, and when is it important to kind of get rid of it? Like what should you be focusing on? It's almost like blurring out the background or something. Or I'll just kind of be setting a scene. I think another thing I did in Stonebreaker is I'm still interested in kind of these ideas of how a story will how like a place can be perceived by different people, and how history can be perceived by different people. So I had sort of these characters who are from far outside this culture kind of coming in and providing their own kind of perspective on things. So like there's like 6 different perspectives in this story about how everyone is thinking about the past and who they are, and lots of talking about identity, and like I guess if you look back in this scene, you can see that Anya, her hair is different. She's actually wearing some different clothes because she's in a different context. Lots of thinking about like how our identity changes depending on where we're at, and like what the expectations are and the problems with that. I don't know. Those are just kind of what I'm interested in these stories. And yeah, like I'm saying, like there's a lot of themes going on in Stonebreaker. Like I made it a pretty big story, and part of that is that I've just been working on it for quite a bit longer than I was with Over the Wall. Over the Wall took maybe 2 years to write. I've been working on this for like 4. And 4 years is like a lot of time. That's a lot of time for like the world to change and your ideas to change, for your characters to kind of change a bit. Like that's Anya at the beginning of the story, and that's her near the end. Like her design has changed quite a bit. And it's just been like another challenge I wasn't really expecting, like writing something this long and trying to keep it consistent and thematically kind of coherent is difficult. And it's, like another skill I'm having to learn now, like how do you tell a long form story as opposed to like a shorter one? So Stonebreaker is going to be published by Uncivilized Books, or Odd Books, which is his children's book imprint, Tom Kaczynski's, eventually, but that's when it's done, and it's not done yet. But I still wanted to have some books out, so I kind of looked into doing some self-publishing stuff through a local like print-on-demand company called Bookmobile, who are pretty good. And so these are just the 3 covers from the 3 chapters that I put out so far. Like this is, at the same time, like when I'm doing all this, like all these comics are web comics, and they're online. That's kind of the main place I'm getting out to people. And I never really got a huge following or a lot of a big audience, but I got some people, and especially like people who are kind of my peers. And that was a great way to kind of connect. But I really enjoyed going to shows, either with Tom or kind of on my own. And having more books to kind of to have on the table, makes you look like you're a little more together. So this is a picture from a show I've recently been to. And I think like actually, although I never really made money at these shows, I never really, I couldn't exactly support myself from the proceeds of selling these books, although I was able to use those to like, pay for the flight out and pay for the room and board, which seems to be pretty typical. I met a lot of people at these places. especially like SPX and TCAF and those smaller indie shows are kind of my favorite places to be. And I think it's difficult to really get much attention before you have anything. So it's been interesting to see like how my place in those shows has changed. Like the more I've had out, and the connections I made at these shows is kind of what eventually led to me having finally a career in comics, or at least the start of one right now. Like talking to people and like getting my name known, because I think comics really is kind of honestly about who you know. That's how the industry works for good or bad. And I think still conventions are kind of a great place to have that happen. So quickly, here's just a few other things that I worked on. I realized that, so the last one in the corner there I did with, is like a little thing I did with Sean Lynch. I just realized I put the wrong one up there because it's not the one he painted. Sorry, dude. But I did a few other things, over the years. I was working on like just some like covers for like children's magazines and stuff. That one's from Muse, which is imprint of Cricket. Just a children's magazine. It was, so I've had a few times to do little projects, but they never really led anywhere. And I think I was expecting that to be the case. Like you'd make a few covers for like children's book magazines, and then you like slowly build your way up, and that's kind of how it worked. But that really wasn't my experience anyway. And who knows? Like maybe I'll get something out of this at some point in terms of more work. But what really happened was, I made a connection at a convention, talked to some people, I book it out there, and then one day I get this email from Dark Horse while I'm like sitting at my desk job in CSA, which said, pretty much to paraphrase, like, hey, how would you like to work on the next 3 Avatar comics? Which is like, you don't get emails like that. So that was a crazy, crazy day. Just kind of staring at the screen and not doing my work for a while. So I can actually show this picture because it just came out a few days before now, which is great. And you can see that it's exclusive to Entertainment Weekly because I couldn't actually get a real image of it and I had to steal it from the website. But this is going to be, this is kind of what I'm working on now. This is kind of the new place that I'm just moving into now. So it's hard to know really what it's going to be like. Although it's been a lot of hard work so far. But, this is going to be a story. It's written by Faith Erin Hicks, who I respect a lot as a writer. The color's going to be by a guy named Ryan Hill, who's doing a great job. So I'm working as a team now, which is something else that's new. To actually be working on someone else's stories and working on, having someone else do the colors for my work and seeing how that changes things is kind of a cool experience. And yeah, I'm just excited to finally be in a place where I can, make comics all the time. We'll see how long that lasts. But it's, I just want to say it took me 7 years to get here, and I was working pretty hard most of the time. And I guess like the only thing that I kind of learned from that is, it pays to be patient, to be willing to take on other strange jobs, like even if they don't seem like they're fully relevant at the time. Like I know all my work doing web design at CSA gave me the skills to like make a web comic, right? So everything kind of ends up coming together in some way. And in my skills doing comics, like I learned how to illustrate, I learned how to do graphic design, learned a lot of other things that were applicable outside of just comics. And I was able to, feed myself for 7 years and then make enough comics that someone actually noticed. And that's, pretty much I think how it works. But everyone's experience is going to be a bit different, but that's kind of what mine was. And I think that's pretty much what I have in terms of that. And thanks for listening. Thanks for having me back here. So. You can probably do questions.
What's it like going from writing your own stories, your comics to working with a team?
It was less weird than I thought it would be. I think I had enough experience of like being able to translate like a script, because that's how I kind of worked. I work from a script and then I go into like drawing the pages. So it's pretty easy to like take a script and turn it into, and know how to lay out pages based on that. So it wasn't as big as a challenge as I thought it would be. It was a bit weird not having like the ability to say, this, I don't like the way this works, let me change it. You know, like that's something I have to get used to. And having people come back later and, you know, do critiques on your work and tell you what to change. Feels a bit like being back in school, actually, which is fine. Yeah, so that was an interesting change, but yeah, it wasn't as bad as I thought. Let's say that.
What about that? Isn't it nice to be able to just like focus in on one job, or did you miss some of the control with the story?
I kind of didn't miss doing the writing for this one. Like, I think I like writing a lot, and I'm gonna be happy to go back to it. But yeah, it's nice to have a project where I only have to worry about the visual storytelling and not like all the other stuff. So, yeah.
How did you keep yourself motivated for this long-term project?
I do think it was kind of, that's a good question. Part of it, I just I like drawing comics so much that it was sort of just my default mode when I wasn't at work in some ways. I think another thing was I had those characters who I really wanted to see where they ended up, and that kind of was a good like motivation. Like I said, like the first attempt at a comic, that Shipwrecked Planet thing, I didn't care about anybody in it, so it fell apart. Whereas like now I have some characters where I sort of want to see them succeed or fail in interesting ways, and that's been a good motivation. That's the best answer I got. So yeah, yeah.
So, did you have any connections with anyone over at Dark Horse beforehand? Or was it literally just completely out of the content?
I knew Faith. I think that was mostly it. I knew her from like going to shows, and I knew a few. I spent some time in Portland at Periscope. I think it's Helioscope now. Like it's a comics collective with like Steve Lieber and all those guys, and they have a lot of Dark Horse connections too. So it's possible that may have had an effect too, but as far as I know, like that's not what happened. So, yes, like sometimes the connections are strange, sometimes they're diffuse, but yeah, the more is better or something. Anyway, yeah, that's what I got. Yeah,
I'm
Barb.
curious with, you said like Stonebreaker got so, would you approach doing a large project like Stonebreaker differently now?
Yeah, I think so. The interesting thing is, like, I actually wrote it out pretty strictly. Like, I had like a big outline. I knew exactly where it was going, and like I knew what the ending was going to be. And then about halfway through it, I got rid of the ending because I didn't like it anymore. And I don't really know what the answer to that is, because like in the process of writing it, like I kind of changed in my ideas about what the story should be changed. And it might just be inevitable with something that long. And maybe the answer is just be willing to accept that. I know, like when I'm writing prose, I often don't know how the story should begin until I end it, and that's really hard to do with comics, especially when you're updating it like bi-weekly online, so everyone can see every page you finish. So there's really no going back. And you know, I think that's my only big problem about comics is that it's so locked in because the time you need to spend on it is so much. But I do get to publish it, so I do get to edit it, so maybe I can fix the problem that way. I don't know. I'm still working on that problem. But anything else? Yeah, Sean.
So I got a couple. Why here? Why still comics? And when you hate doing it on those days where something doesn't match,
Yeah.
still like, how do you get out of that?
Yeah, that's an easy question. Yeah, I don't know. I think part of it, like, there is a high I get from finishing a page and finishing a story. And maybe part of it is just, like, reaching for that all the time. And again, like, yeah, I guess I keep coming back to, like, I just really, I like seeing these characters come alive on the page and seeing these places kind of come alive. And even if it's, like, even if I'm, like, slogging through drawing the 6,000th brick in this, like, city, like, I know that it's going to be, like, have a lot of impact when it's finished. And something about that keeps me going. Something about like, you know, I'll be able to create this like mood in people just from putting lots of lines on a computer screen is a really cool thing. So something like that. I don't know, maybe I'm just addicted to drawing. Maybe that's a problem. You first, yeah.
Is it hard to, on your own work, finalize like story and scenes for like character when there's like kind of infinite possibilities for you to do whatever?
I think actually partially like I was able to get around that because I had to have a page up every week. So that there's sort of a strong deadline on like, and maybe that actually answers Sean's question a bit too. Like I always needed to have something ready because I had people who kind of wanted to see it. So a webcomic kind of made it, so I always had a deadline and I couldn't be too precious with what I was drawing. Yeah, so for my own stuff, yeah, I think that's what did it. And for like, you know, the stuff I'm working for other people, there's definitely a deadline there too. So you either make your own deadlines or you work on someone else's, and that's how things get done, I guess. For me, anyway.
When you're your own boss, how do you keep yourself on your deadline? Maybe that goes to Sean's
Yeah.
question of when things aren't going right. What keeps you from just chucking it for a week?
I don't know. I guess I always, for whatever reason, I almost feel like I was more beholden to the deadlines in like Stonebreaker and Over the Wall than I was like the deadlines at my job. Like this is the more important thing to me in many ways. I just felt a drive to get it done, to actually make it work. Maybe I had some ambition to actually end up here and have like, you know, have a real, not having to go to the day job, I think, compelled me forward to try to make something. I'm still kind of crazy. It worked, but you know, that's good. Yeah.
Do you have anything in its early stages right now that we might be looking out for in the future?
Avatar is going to use up my entire year, so that's what I'm going to be doing for the foreseeable future. I'm always posting stuff on my Twitter account, though, probably too much. So if you want to see what I'm doing, that's a good place to go. Yeah.
What's your Twitter handle?
Oh, it's Peter_Wortman. Make it simple. Yeah.
Like, did you ever get a lot of hate or like complaints that you weren't updating fast enough when you were posting online? Or did you not have?
I didn't. I think that's partially because I didn't really have many people reading it. At least not enough to like hit that kind of like threshold. Honestly, like now that I'm saying like I can't update as much because I'm working on this other big thing, people have been pretty okay about it. But I do think there's like a threshold you cross like when that starts getting bad. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
Can you speak toward the major ed what you took, how it affected your career, and if you were so interested in comics then and then since, why not that major when you were here?
Well, I was an illustration major.
That's right.
I was going to be a comics major, but Terry Beatty told me not to. I'm gonna call him out. He's also the guy who got me into comics in the first place. So it's sort of a weird, you know. And I kind of think it. I almost feel like it doesn't matter too much, like which major you go to. I got a lot of illustration knowledge out of comics, out of the comics classes I took, illustration and perspective and anatomy and all that stuff those were all like comic classes. And then I went off and I became a designer for a long time. So it's the skills that you get. It's not necessarily the major you get that matters as far as my experience was. So I don't know what I'd do if I came back again. I'd probably be a comics major, but illustration was great. Oh, now it's dark. Yeah.
How would you, like, because you've worked like in the studio space, like how would you compare that to working like on your own or like pros and cons of?
Yeah. I forgot to bring that up. Yeah. So I think a lot of you guys probably are in my studio because half the school is like an intern at World Monster. I would probably have gone insane if I didn't have like an external place to go, right? If I'm working from home all the time, that's crazy making. So yeah, I think like having a studio, having like some peers you can talk to and kind of who can check your work, that was a huge thing. And yeah, I don't think if I didn't have that, this would probably not be nearly as possible. I would certainly be a lot more cranky. So.
Can you just talk a little bit about your specific process, what tools you use?
Oh, sure. Everything's digital. I use Clip Studio Paint and pretty much nothing else. Use a little bit of Photoshop to do like pre-press stuff or get stuff ready for the web, but Clip Studio Paint's great. I have a Cintiq. This is where I do everything. And that's really all I kind of need. So pretty simple.
Did you start out digital?
I was doing a lot of all my line art used to be just a strange blue screen. All my line art was like traditional for a long time. But I eventually figured out, Clip Studio came out and inking on that was a lot more fun and didn't feel like horrendous like Photoshop used to. So I just switched entirely to digital, and then I'll have like giant, like piles of like art kind of like cluttering up my house, which is nice. Yeah, so I like doing everything digital now. It's a lot easier.
I have one more.
Okay.
Well, World Monster is, could you talk a little bit, like, what exactly is World Monster, and it's a collective of...
Yeah, it's sort of Xander Cannon had a space and needed some other people to come up there, and I think that's pretty much it. I think the idea is kind of like you have this place where kind of professional comic artists can come together and keep each other sane and kind of critique each other's work, and have that space where there's you can just where everyone's kind of working on something. It's a little bit actually. It's sort of like a smaller version of Periscope, I think, or like that I went to before. That kind of idea of just you're not necessarily working together as a company, but you're all kind of heading toward the same goal and kind of supporting each other, and maybe even kind of at some point, have a place where people know, this is where the comic artists are working in the city. And that's just kind of I think it's, yeah. It's mostly like a comic support group. It's good. Yeah.
In regards to scripting, I know that you have your points set out that you want to get
Yeah.
to in the end. How is it that you open up in regards to loosening what you need to go through in between those points? And do you kind of just throw ideas on the paper and be like, oh, that's going to work in between? Or what exactly is your process in regards to scripting
For writing it?
in between your big points?
I tend to go. I start with like a full script, so I'll do outline first, and then I'll actually write, like panel layouts and what everyone's saying, and then I'll do layouts, and then I'll do the final art. Yeah, so I can't. I don't just work from an outline. I can't do that personally. I like having a script with everything like figured out already, almost like almost write it like it's prose as a full novel. That just helps my brain kind of work with it. But I think every comic artist I've talked to who does scripting does it completely differently. So unless you're like working for like someone else and you need like my current project with Avatar, like I'm getting a pretty standard script, like with every panel broken out and everything described. But that's just because I have to write it for her, and that's I think otherwise I just do whatever feels right. Yeah. Yeah.
Just as a follow-up to that, so some of these things where things have changed, did you feel like that's your growth as an artist and a writer and
I think so.
characters?
Yeah. And I think sometimes it's I don't really know how a scene's going to play out till I draw it, because like having the characters like doing expressions and kind of moving around will change my appreciation of the scene, and that might change kind of entirely like where I think as things are going. So Yeah, actually, there is a lot of like, I'll write a script, I'll draw the scene, the script doesn't make sense anymore, I'll go back to the script, I'll change it, you know. It's a very iterative process. At least for Stonebreaker. It wasn't so much for Over the Wall. And I don't know what the next project's going to be like, since everything is kind of a learning process. But yeah, that's how it's been. Yeah.
How did you came up with these characters? The Stonebreaker, or the Wall?
Yeah.
Did you meet somebody, or kind of an animal?
Uh, yeah. So Anya is very much my sister. She was very much the person who was always kind of danger didn't mean much to her. You know, that's just a fun character to write. I'm not sure quite where Taurus came from. I don't know. I think I just wanted to draw a floaty dragon thing, so I did it. Yeah, I mean, like the Stonebreaker and Over the Wall are very kind of self-indulgent. You know, it's the ideas I like a lot. You know, that's why there's like a lot of like stuff I just kind of stole from Shadow of the Colossus or like little Miyazaki kind of things I've grabbed. So, yeah, I hope that answers the question. Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah.
So now that you've gotten to the point where you're drawing Avatar,
Yeah.
and you like made it, what do you have any? What's your next big goal? Are you going to Marvel or DC, or are you trying to do your own thing?
I think I would really like to go back to doing my own thing after this. You know, I would love to tell my own story. I have like this big sci-fi epic in my mind because, you know, big epics always work well. Apparently I can't get away from them. So yeah, we'll see what happens. Yeah, I'm just I'm not sure where things are going to go yet, but honestly, I kind of have to get through Avatar first. Like it's a ton of work. And the deadlines are very close, and that's just kind of the way it is. But that means I don't have much time to think about what comes next. But yeah, my hope is to do something on my own. Yeah.
With Avatar, what's it like working on something that you happen to be a fan of?
It's pretty cool. It's really weird to like draw the weird airhead dude and like it's like canon or something. It's super weird. I'm not sure if I've entirely realized it yet, but yeah, it's been amazing. Yeah.
Is it stressful at all?
A little bit. I think, you know, honestly, like I feel like I'm at a point now where I feel confident enough in like my drawing that it wasn't as big it wasn't as stressful as it might have been, because I knew I could pretty much handle what they were going to ask me to do. So I guess that's one benefit of doing this a little later on. But yeah, it's a bit weird. It's a bit stressful, but it's fun. Yeah.
So since you're continuing the Avatar comics, are you trying to bring your own kind of style to it, or are you trying to emulate the style that was already there?
I think they said mostly like, yeah, just use your own style. I guess the thing is that people have been comparing my style to Avatar for years. So I don't know, I don't really have to do much, which is nice. But you know, the original creators are still involved in the project, and I think they sort of respect, they sort of understand like how you might want to just do your own thing. So it's actually been a lot more forgiving than I thought it would be. So yeah, that's been nice. Yeah.
What's your favorite character?
Favorite character? Oh, Toph, for sure. Yeah. Toph is best. Yeah.
Peter, you said how interesting it was trying to go off of characters that are pre-established as well.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious about this current process that you're going with right now too. Do you have to go off of like predetermined like environments, or are you kind of making your own too? You kind of said before like how great it was making a character as an environment.
Yeah.
I was curious if you're able to throw your own stuff into that, or if it's like it's more what the script calls for.
It's what the script calls for. I mean, like I'm designing the whole, like it takes place in a city, in what becomes Republic City, if you're familiar with the Avatar mythos. So it's but I'm designing the whole thing and trying to like, it has to be a lot of fun to try to figure out like how would the city have looked like before Korra happens, you know. So there's been a lot of there's a lot of flexibility there. There's a lot of constraints there, and I think it's something I haven't done before, but it's an interesting line to try to walk to make sure that it keeps the style it should have and kind of the shape it should have, but it's still kind of my own thing, and still kind of fits the themes of the story. So, yeah. Cool. I think we're good then. Oh, did I miss something? Yeah.
I was going to ask if you could go back to the year Wortman and mcad.
Yeah.
What piece of advice would you give?
Be patient. Be open to your peers, and keep your friendships open and support each other, and that's and eventually that will yield something. That's. I mean, I wanted to be more positive than it came off, but it took me a fairly long time to reach this point, but I did get here. So I guess that's kind of what I would say. It might not be an immediate thing, but that doesn't mean that's not going to happen. In the meantime, still keep making comics. That's what I got. All right.